I'm gonna ask a question related to temporality, because you've talked about it in one way, but I'm curious about, Mark, temporality in the sense that there are different kinds of memory that are called up or erased that are implicit in the first, the relationship to that old history of rear projection and what we remember of that and what we forget culturally. And then, of course, in modernism, particularly in modernist architecture, which when you think about the International style was in a sense about forgetting what was around, and that it was about a kind of utopian project. So I'm just curious what your thinking about that is. Does that figure in your thinking in what you create?
The idea of a utopian forgetting.
Yeah, that sense of memory and oblivion, I suppose.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not quite sure how to answer it.
Good.
I mean, I think the utopian aspect is rather more obvious, because I think that, in some sense, I try not to think of myself as being nostalgic, and that's the great difficulty of trying to rethink those moments of. I mean, in a way, those moments are those utopian moments, or those moments of utopia, those moments of anticipation of the future, are now forgotten, and one doesn't really know. You know, as people like T.J. Clark say, we can never really imagine now what it would feel like to expect the future to be here, or to expect the modern to come, because the modern is here, and that sense of anticipation. I think there's something similar in my fantasy of working with film is the idea of the very first moving image. One could never know what the first moving image felt like. You know, when one talks about, we hear a lot about the Lumiere brothers saying, you know, sort of people talk about, you know, people getting scared about the train coming out of the train. Well, that's just so apocryphal, but you know, what's more likely is that they were shocked and surprised by the idea that a picture, which heretofore had been relatively stable, would start, at least a projected image, they'd seen moving images in, you know, machines and so on, that would start to shake and move. So I think this idea of with my films, I try to think about what it might like, what that sense of unbelievable surprise and anticipation of what this could be, if one can reinvent that moment. So the utopianism, I think, which is all part of, you know, the idea of the future, and that the modern will be something that we can believe in, and not just think that it will be a kind of a further ideological subjection, and so on and so forth. But of course, that leaves, as an artist, that leaves you open to a kind of nostalgia, you know, the accusation of nostalgia, and using rear projection. It's very conscious that, or I have been very conscious that it might feel that I'm trying to, you know, trying to conjure up this old-fashioned form in order to, almost as if to say, you know, if I can be crude, it was better then, you know, things were better then. And I'm not sure if one ever gets away from that, but what I try to do with all my work is to use those older forms inside of newer forms. So, for instance, the rear projection works are shot, you know, even though they have 35mm rear projection in the background, they're shot with, as Benjamin noted, with red, you know, the red camera, for instance, the last few films, which is the latest, you know, equivalent of a moving digital SLR. So there's a kind of, what would you call it, a kind of osmosis, contamination, a reinvention of an old form inside of a really new form. And I think that's a way of trying to think about how these older forms can be new without necessarily being nostalgic. The thing about memory is that the great thing about film as an artist is that, okay, the great thing about film, and also the worst thing about film, is that it's a popular form, and therefore, you know, everybody who watches let's call it a film that is supposedly an artwork, already has this unbelievable opinion and memory bank of millions of other moving images, which can range from everything from schlock to greatness, and that's I think that's both one's handicap, you know, because in paint, you know, one thinks about painting still, and painting is, you know, even as a painter can rest assured that there is, outside of the gallery, no such thing as popular painting. You know, I mean, painting exists inside the gallery and nowhere else. So he or she can rest assured that the audience is looking at their work usually in a pretty close relationship to other forms which are considered to be as good as theirs. So, there's no, popular mystique about it. Although, of course, because they incorporate filmic and photographic forms inside of their paintings, they have some kind of secondary memory. But with film, you've got this, everybody watches movies, and everyone's an expert on movies, so everybody has a kind of memory. But I like that too. So that's the negative side, is that it's hard to hold your audience with the work you're making. But the positive side of that is that that your image, the image you're making, can actually force the audience, or no, not force, but subject the audience to a kind of full-on liberation, that they actually then become some kind of author of a new work, which is generated that image brings to bear, that image conjures for them or triggers it. I don't know if I'm getting anywhere close to talking through it to try to get an answer, but I think that sense of memory is acutely problematic and acutely interesting because of film's double articulation as a popular and a high art form, if you will.